The following program is sponsored by Seattle Open Door Church. Seattle Open Door Church is committed to loving God, loving people, and loving life. Our doors are open to whomever. No masks required. Seattle Open Door Church is located in downtown Burien next to the Southwest Courthouse. Host for There Is Hope is Richard Dover, the senior pastor of Seattle Open Door Church in Burien.
Do is we don't have a time to read all of the story because there's several chapters about it, but along the way I'll share some of the concepts so that you'll know kind of what it's about. So if we look at our introduction, the title of the lesson is Face-to-Face Encounter with God. Jacob is the believer's prototype. Though he had the promise of blessing, he tried to obtain the blessing through his own effort. This resulted in him leading a double life until he had an encounter face-to-face with God. This experience broke him, and then he began to walk in the right way, living for God. If you know the story, that'll make perfect sense to you. If you don't know the story, you'll catch on. The second paragraph, we talk about what people can do at times. Many times those who have experienced wounds in their past do not even believe they can be blessed to be set free from the wounds of the past. Or they try to get healed from the past in many different ways other than going to God. Some wear wet masks as if they are okay, yet almost anything can be a trigger for them. All need to have a face-to-face encounter with God just like Jacob had in his own life. So let's look at that second paragraph. Do you believe that those who have experienced wounding, some believe that is what is going to be the rest of their life? That they believe that life is just going to be bad for them the rest of their life? Is there some that believe that? Absolutely. So they don't even believe there's a blessing for them. What's the blessing? If you're a believer in Jesus Christ, the blessing is you can be set free from all the things of the past. You can live a victorious, overcoming life. But some don't even believe that they can be blessed. And then there are those who try to get healed by trying their own way of doing it. Anybody know what that means? So maybe if I just take control of life and I become the manipulator instead of people manipulating me. Does that happen? What about I become the enabler? If I just let anybody do whatever they do to me, finally somebody will love me. Do either of those work? And so what is there something about attitude?
Yes. Very much.
Very much so. It's about attitude. And so if you have the wrong attitude, we're going to have a gentleman probably in February that's going to be coming to speak, and he tried 20 different ways to try to find peace. And the 20 different ways was he tried every religion except Christianity. He tried engineering. He tried psychology. He did everything to find an answer. He found out the answer was Jesus Christ. So we can go all kinds of different ways to find healing, but ultimately the answer is Jesus Christ. How many know that sometimes we have to have a wrestling match with God to get healed? How many know that we have to have a face-to-face encounter where God gets real? Because how many know when you've been wounded and scarred and you grow up, and maybe you've been wounded and scarred in a Christian home. A mother and father that served God, but they were fallen human beings and they made some bad choices along the way. They weren't the best of parents, or you thought they weren't the best of parents. Because how many know some people grew up with great parents, but they judged them as not being good parents. And so what happens is you make judgment against Christianity, against God, and so the reality is you want nothing to do with God because your experience is that God isn't a good God. And so what does God do? He'll bring you into circumstances where you have to have a face-to-face encounter with Him. Maybe it's a car accident that He allows to happen. And you're laying in the bed, totally crippled, and the only person you have to talk to is who? God, in your mind, because you can't even talk. So God can bring that face-to-face encounter to us. So this starting the lesson. This is again based upon the story of Jacob. It's not all going to parallel to our story, but it'll give you some ideas. So Roman numeral number 1 says, what is in a name? First thing is it says A is conception. In Genesis 25:19-26, there's the story of the birth of Jacob and Esau. Jacob was struggling even at birth. There are many people who deal with the spirit of rejection even at birth. Maybe it turns out that their parents did not want a child or another child. Maybe they're born to addicted parents and were a crack baby or a fetal alcohol syndrome baby. Maybe they're born out of wedlock or conceived out of rape. Maybe they were adopted. Whatever's behind their conception, there's a message of being rejected. Does that make sense? That there's that indirect message. If your parents didn't want another child, when you get born, do they say to you, look, you say, I didn't want you? Do they do that? Most likely not. But will they relate to you a certain way if you're that unexpected child? They can. Or you turn around and you're conceived by rape and the mother carries you to term and raises you. But there's a part of bitterness that's within her. You think that somehow that will come out, that can be manifested, and that a child's spirit can look at it. Well, let's look at the story for a second to see how Jacob starts out, even at conception. In Genesis 25, 19 to 26, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at 22. And Rebekah is conceived two child, so they're twins. It's going to be Jacob and Esau. And it says, and the children struggled together within her. And she said, if it be so, why am I feeling this? What is happening? God, why is this happening? There's this war going on within my belly. And the Lord answers her and says, there's two nations in your womb, and two manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. So, how many know that if there's two children in you, okay, one's going to come out before the other one, right? So the one that comes out first is the older one, even if it's by 10 seconds, right? How many know the Jewish culture is the older has what? The inheritance, the birthright. And there's a war going on. Esau is the older, Jacob is the younger. He wrestles his way, even as a baby. He's wrestling his way, I want to be the firstborn. That's how he starts his life. Do you think that maybe how you start life can be how you end life if you're not careful? If you start in life with a negative experience, can you carry that negative experience all the way to the day you die? Absolutely. We have to be very careful. It says it needs to be understood that times individuals were loved in spite of how they were conceived or the environment of their conception, but they perceived they were not loved. Even if we come in a good environment, we can perceive we're not loved. I believe that probably in my home I was loved. I was the firstborn. Normally the firstborn would be, the parents are excited about that. I believe that I probably was loved. It's just that I never perceived it. So even if I was loved, I didn't perceive it. Now I make a joke that maybe my dad cursed me, because I found out later on that when I was born and the nurse brought me in, at that time, you know, fathers weren't with the wife when she was having the baby, right? She has the baby and the baby gets all cleaned up and the nurse brings them. So I'm all cleaned up, right? I'm real presentable. She brings me to my dad and my dad says, that's the ugliest baby I've ever seen. And this was in Queen of Angels Hospital, which is run by the Catholic Church. It was nuns, so it was a nun. So what do you think the nun felt like when he said that? And she looked at him, how dare you say that you'd call your baby, and I think he said even looked like a monkey. Okay, so did I hear that? It's a trick question. I heard it in my spirit. Because can I interpret as a baby? Can I interpret all that? No.
You can interpret the emotions.
The emotions and stuff. Now, again, if I'm an hour old, I don't have much reasoning. And I don't want to make it bigger than what it is, because I really don't. I'm kind of joking with you, because I really don't think that really affected me. But if that attitude carried on by my father, could that affect me? So he says, how many know that most babies look, if you get really honest, they look kind of ugly, kind of wrinkled up, they look kind of, and especially if they first come out, before they get cleaned up, they don't look the best. Okay, but you don't say, my baby looks ugly, that's the ugliest baby I've ever seen. Now, if I would have been the nurse there, I would have said, well, let me take you to show you a bunch of ugly babies, because they're all ugly at first. And then it's not the ugliest one you've seen. But out of it is that little statement, of course, didn't probably affect me, but if that statement continued on, could it affect me?
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. What happens at conception can affect you.
I assume somebody told you later that's what you're
Yes, I did not know it at the time. I didn't suddenly wake up one morning and say, I remember now, I knew there was something I remembered. It was my dad said this. No, that didn't happen. Okay. Somebody told me, and I was old enough to be able to hear it and not be devastated by it. But even though I was told that years later, I was probably told that, I don't know, probably at 12, 13 years old. Do you know it still had a little bit of effect on me?
Yeah.
You know why? I grew up as an asthmatic kid that was never good enough. Couldn't play sports, always sick. I always felt like I was the loser. So if you felt like you're a loser and you hear that, even if you're 12, 13 years old, can the enemy use that to create something in you?
Definitely.
Do you see how easy wounding can happen? So this thing between Jacob and Esau, there starts to be a battle of who's going to win. You don't think that brought damage in both of their hearts? And now to let you know something prophetic about it, it says there'll be two different nations. Do you know that what took place in the womb has been taking place to this day? The two nations is Israel and Muslims. Still fighting of something that took place in the womb. That's something to think about. That's something to think about. There's a spiritual significance in the midst of that. That's why we need to be careful of what we speak, or the words that we speak. We need to be careful of our actions. We need to realize that when we have people around us, how they may interpret things may be different than how we interpret them. So there's this war that goes on. B, fulfillment. Genesis 25, 27, 34. The name Jacob means supplanter, deceiver, schemer, or trickster. How do you like to have your name mean that? Many individuals who have been wounded in the past learn to cope with the wounding by being manipulative, controlling, or very deceptive. Is that true? If you've been wounded, you're going to find a way of dealing with wounding. And some people are going to be manipulative, they're going to be controlling, they're going to be deceptive. They want to have what? One up on you. And so Jacob was that one up on you kind of a person. And what's interesting is you see in the midst of this, just look at this. I want to look like 27 and 34. And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. And Isaac is their father, Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of the venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Uh-oh. Is there some favoritism going on? There's some favoritism going on. Can that affect you later on in life? Absolutely. And Jacob was eating porridge, and Esau came from the field, and he was faint, he was tired, and Esau said to Jacob, "Feed me, I pray thee, I'm hungry. I want some of the food you're making." And you know what Jacob says? "Sure, just let me have your birthright." So at that time, Esau sells his birthright to get some pottage, some porridge. Are you willing to give up what God has for you for the sake of something of this world? That's something to think about. And notice that Jacob was what? He was a manipulator. He knew what to do. I know how to get the birthright. He's really hungry. I can convince him right now. Because I can see him there making the meal. Thinking, my brother's out there, he's hunting. Guess what? If you're hunting for a deer, you're getting a goat, and you're going to cook it, is it going to take a while? You got to skin it. You got to gut it out. You got to do all this preparation. And you've gone hunting, and you're going to eat, and you think, I got to do all this. They didn't have microwaves. So his brother knew that, and he took advantage of it. See, when we get wounded, sometimes we take advantage of situations so that we can have that upper hand. Now, think about your own life. Were you the manipulator, or were you the enabler? Were you the one that manipulated your circumstances so you could be in control? Or were you the one convinced that you just give up? You're always going to let somebody win. You see, Esau ended up letting his brother win because he didn't want to pay the effort to what? To do the prep work. Can I tell you, if you don't want to work on yourself, here's what will happen. If you don't want to work on yourself, you're an enabler, you'll be abused the rest of your life. And how many know even if you're not being abused, you'll read it as an abuse because of where you're at? C, struggling, who is in control. In Genesis 27, Jacob lives the life of a manipulator, controller, and his mother is an enabler. A lifestyle of nothing less than control and manipulation leads always to looking for the enabler to get what you want. Sadly, many who have experienced abuse can either become manipulators or enablers. Many times individuals become codependent. Codependent is you're dependent upon everybody else, and your identity is but what people think about you. So you can either be that person that is concerned with what everybody thinks about you, or you're going to be that person that takes control. Now what if you're both?
Oh, boy.
What if you're both? That you like to be in control, but you're also concerned about what everybody thinks about you. Do you think that might play with your head? What if I was to tell you that maybe some people are bipolar? And that bipolar that came from mental illness is because of how they learned to deal with life. Do you think that if you keep dealing with life a certain way, it can affect you mentally? So if you're a little kid and your father's beating on you all the time and you find an imaginary friend to help you to deal with that, can you grow older and suddenly have more imaginary friends to a point of having schizophrenia? So everybody wants to blame the devil for mental illness, just cast out the demons, the person will be okay. Well, sometimes it has nothing to do with demonic stuff. It has to do with the brain cells, what's going on in the brain, and it has to do with the choices we've made. And so if you're a person that goes back and forth between being somebody that is a man pleaser, and then when people abuse you, you take control and you take charge, and you have this back and forth, could that make you manic depressive? Absolutely it can. And so what is the healing? Is the healing medication? This is a trick question. The medication can help, right? The medication can help get the brain cells going. But if you don't deal with how you deal with life, will the medication ultimately be the fix? Because you can get all the medication to get your brain functioning properly, but you have some control over how you think and how you deal with life. And so in order to be healed, you have to be at a place where you say that, you know, I'm not dealing with things the right way. How do I deal with them differently? And do you know, until Jacob looks at how he deals with life, he's going to be the same person. Is that true?
Probably.
And how many know that sometimes it takes something challenging to get you to have to deal with life? Something to force you to deal with life. So number 2, Jacob's example. Even when Jacob was a liar and a cunning opportunist, God did not leave him. Is that true? Will God leave you just because you are a certain way?
No.
God is always pursuing us, always running after us, always chasing us. Even Jacob was a liar and a cunning opportunist. God did not leave him. God will always deal with us to bring change. Did you hear that? Why does he deal with us? To bring change. Well, why is it that God always seems to be on my back? Maybe there's some change that needs to take place. I mean, that's why he's always on your back. Why is it that Pastor Rich seems to be riding on me?
Changes.
Is it because he doesn't like you? Or is it because God is using him to try to help you? But what can your attitude be?
Rebellion.
Rebellion, stubbornness. Remember, whatever a man sows, he will reap. God deals with Jacob as he allows him to reap some of his own actions from Laban. Okay, you might not know the story, but I'll kind of give you a little summary of the story. So, there is Jacob. He ends up leaving his father's house. He ends up wanting to get married. He's seen some women to get married to, the whole story. There's a beautiful, beautiful, gorgeous woman that he wants to marry. Laban is her father-in-law. Okay. Is her father. And so he marries, gets married as his father-in-law. So Laban is the father. And they have this great wedding and everything. And the agreement is that he would get to marry. After he served Laban for several years, he'd get to marry her. He'd have to serve for a while, but he'd get to marry her. He goes to marry her. They go into the tent. They have their good time and everything. They consummate the marriage. And then there's a switcheroo. It happens to be her ugly sister. So he wakes up in the morning and says, "What? How'd you trick me?" Now, got to understand their culture. A lot of drinking went on during the wedding ceremony. Because I don't know how he got tricked, okay?
Don't women wear a veil?
Well, they wear a veil or something, but hey, before I go have nookie with you, I'm going to kind of know who you are.
Is that right?
Normal.
It was dark.
It was dark. It was dark. The lights are out, and there was veil, all that kind of stuff, and there was drinking going on. And what if I tell you, if you're a manipulator, you will get manipulated even when it comes to that. He's a manipulator, but you know what Jacob found? Somebody that can manipulate better than him, Laban. So he gets to the morning and says, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe this. This is the toothless wonder I married. I don't know what's going on." So then there is, okay, if you work for me a little bit longer, you will get the right woman. All that's happening. Do you reap what you sow? You absolutely reap what you sow. If you sow deception, will deception come your way?
Probably.
And you know what happens? Listen, when you reap deception, deception will come your way, and then you don't even know you're deceived, because if you're deceived, you can't know you're deceived because you're deceived. Think about that. When you're deceived, do you know you're deceived? No, because you are deceived. And so you believe that you got away with something, but did you really get away with something? And so turn your page. Well, first at the bottom it says, "If a wounded person deals with their pain by taking advantage of others, by sowing hate and bitterness, by making inner vows and judgments, it will come back to them sooner or later." It will happen. If the way you deal with hurt is you're going to make somebody else pay for your hurt, will you end up paying? And how many know even in relationships? We're going to talk more when we talk about bitter root judgments and inner vows, but here's what can happen. I I'm going to say this every week, is if you sow bitterness and you sow hatred and you sow suspicion, you can't trust anybody. You know who you'll marry? Somebody you can't trust. And can I tell you that if you have that strong in your heart, you can't trust. I'm going to tell you, I bet Jacob and Laban, they had this battle going because they didn't trust each other. Two manipulators don't trust each other, and they try to outdo each other. And so if you're a person who is a person that says you just can't trust anybody, and you sow that vow, then when you marry somebody, you know they can be the best Christian man or the best Christian woman. They can be on the church staff. They can be a pastor. But when you marry them, guess what can happen? You're not marrying the person you thought you married, because you've sown suspicion. You've sown mistrust. How many know if you get in a marriage and somebody doesn't trust you all the time, what can happen? What does that do to the person who is trustworthy? It tears them apart, tears their heart. And after a while, if you keep being told you're not trustworthy, what can happen? You might become untrustworthy. Especially if you have wounding in your heart and you were told you never can be trustworthy. Your mom says to you, you'll never be trustworthy.
Bad news.
So she's sown that seed in that godly husband that you'll never be trustworthy. He marries a woman who says men can never be trustworthy. What can happen?
Not good.
It can be a big mess that can happen. So that's why we have to get to a place that God gets into that face-to-face encounter with God. God, show me, reveal to me those vows I have made. Show me those things. You see, the problem with Jacob, he's not seeing his problem. He just got manipulated by the better manipulator, and he don't think there's a problem, because you know what he does? He manipulates more. He manipulates, and we're going to see that in a moment, but just, I'm jumping ahead. Jacob makes a deal with God to commit himself to be a faithful tither that he might be blessed. What is his real motive? He's even a manipulator with God. I want us to look at this, because Jacob makes a deal with God that he'll tithe. Is it a good thing to tithe?
Yeah.
It's a great thing to tithe. Tell me what you hear this, hear it, meditate on what he says. And Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in the way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothes to put on, so that I can come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone which I've set for a pillar shall be God's house, and all that I shall give, that God gives to me, I will surely give a tithe unto him. If God, you do this, I'll give you the tithe. So what does he say? So if God will keep me, wherever I go, he'll be with me. And if God will give me food, he'll feed me. If God will give me clothing, if God will bless me, I will tithe. Is that why you tithe?
No.
The way you give to God? So husbands and wives, if you love me, I'll love you. Well, if you say, if you love me, I love you, what's the opposite? If you don't love me, I won't love you. That's a bargaining deal. And he's trying to bargain with God. Can you bargain with God?
No. Yes.
Yes and no? Because did God let him get away with that? God let him get away with it. But how long do you get away with their behavior? Wounded people at times will try to make deals with God. Is that true? If you've been wounded, you've been scarred, you've been damaged, can you try to make deals with God? You try to force the hand of God to be doing something for them, or blaming God if he don't do what they want. God, you saw what I grew up in. How come, Lord, you let this happen to me? And hold a judgment forever. So anything bad that happens, whose fault is it?
God's.
It's God's fault. Never decisions I've made. It's always God's fault. And so here we see this manipulating, and that's what happens that we can do when we get wounded. B, Jacob meets Laban, who becomes Jacob's father-in-law. Laban was controlled by stubbornness and greed and deceived Jacob many times. The deceiver became deceived. You will reap what you sow. And then see the last part here I want to share with you. Jacob bargains with Laban to leave, but Jacob deceives Laban and prospers with increase in his flocks. Laban becomes angry, and Jacob flees from Laban with his family and all his belongings. We all have to answer for deception. Nothing can be hidden from God. He knows just how far to let us go, and then God says enough. Is that true? In all of our lives. God will let you go along with what you do to a point, and then God says enough. Here's the deception. Is Jacob knows he's going to have to leave. He knows this isn't going to work out very good because we're both manipulators, and he keeps having one up on me. So I'm going to have one up on him. So he makes an agreement with them, and the kind of the story is he says to Laban, I'll tell you what, I'm going to take care of all the lambs, goats, cattle, and all that, and you get all the ones that don't have any spots on them. All the purebred ones, right? Sounds good deal to Laban. Laban said, that's a great idea. Yeah, they're the purebred ones. They're the healthiest ones. And so then what Jacob does, he comes up with an idea. Now, I don't know if this can really happen, but God can make things happen if it can't happen. Because what he does, he starts having the goats and the lambs, he has them eat a poplar wood and some other things that is speckled. And when they eat that, and he puts it in the water that they drink, they start coming out speckled. Who gets the speckled ones? Jacob does. Now, I don't know if you tried that scientifically, if that would work. But do you know that God can let that happen? Did you know that God can let you get away with deception? That you know that God will let you be deceived to think you're getting away with it? Do you know that? God will allow you to do that. That seems mean and cruel, but you know why God's doing it? Because he wants it to ultimately backfire on you. Why? So you have a face-to-face encounter. And so next week we're going to look at how this looks like a good thing, but ultimately it's going to become a place where Jacob has to face God. Because guess what? God will let you get away with whatever you get away with, your sin, with your rebellion. You'll get away with the way you deal with pain in your life, the way you deal with the wounds and scars. You can get away with all the dysfunctional behavior that you want to get away with, and God will let you. But what will happen at some point in time, especially if you're a believer in Jesus Christ? God's going to say enough. Because if you're a believer in Jesus Christ, God loves you, and God is obligated to say enough. Why? Because when God says enough, what does he do? He says enough, and then he gives you what? He sets you free. Because he has a face-to-face encounter. He says, okay, now we're going to talk. So next week we're going to see that Jacob and God have a talk. And something happened in the midst of that talk. Jacob walked differently. Can I tell you, when you and God have an encounter, you better walk differently. There better be evidence of that you and God had an encounter, because unless you walk differently, you have not been set free. Unless you're walking more like Christ, unless you're humbled and walk with Christ, you're really not free.
You have been listening to There Is Hope with Pastor Richard Dover. Through Jesus Christ, we can live a victorious life.
Seattle Open Door Church, located in Burien, committed to loving God, loving people, and loving life. Seattle Open Door Church wants you to know that regardless of where you've been or what you've done, God loves you. Their doors are open to anyone and everyone. Their services are Sunday mornings at 11. Seattle Open Door Church is located at 625 Southwest 149th Street in Burien, next to the Southwest Courthouse.